I found out my wife had lied to me when a stranger called at 2 in the morning and told me she'd been in a car accident with another man in the passenger seat. She survived. He walked away. And while she lay in a hospital bed asking why I wouldn't come see her, I was sitting alone in the dark, realizing that whatever weed had didn't break in the crash. It had been broken long before. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 39 years old when my marriage split open in a way I still don't fully understand. I was born in Ohio, raised in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, the kind of place where people waved from their driveways and believed stability was something you earned by showing up every day. My father was an electrician. My mother taught third grade. They stayed married for 43 years. I grew up thinking love was steady, not dramatic. Something you maintained, like a house you kept repairing instead of replacing. I went to a state university, studied civil engineering, not because I loved it, but because I was good at it, and it led to a life that made sense on paper. I worked my way into project management for a mid-sized construction firm. Long hours, predictable stress, decent pay. I liked knowing what tomorrow would look like. I met my wife, Laura, when I was 32. She was a physical therapist at a rehab clinic. She laughed easily, asked thoughtful questions, remembered small things. We dated for 3 years before we got married. No whirlwind, no fireworks, just a quiet certainty that this was someone I could grow old with. For a long time, that felt true. The night everything broke started like most nights. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of night you don't think will matter later. Laura told me she was staying overnight at her sister's place. Said her sister was having a rough time with her divorce and didn't want to be alone. It wasn't unusual. Laura was the dependable one in her family. The listener. The helper. I kissed her goodbye in the kitchen. She smelled like lavender and laundry detergent. She asked me if I'd remembered to move the trash bins to the curb. I said yes, even though I hadn't yet. She left around 8. I spent the evening doing what I usually did when she was gone. Heated leftovers. Watched half a baseball game. Answered a few emails I'd ignored earlier. I went to bed around 11, assuming she'd text me when she arrived safely. The text never came. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Not a text. A call. From an unfamiliar number. I remember thinking it was spam. Or a wrong number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. The voice on the other end was calm. Professional. Too calm for what he was telling me. There had been an accident. A 2-car collision on a state road about 20 miles away. My wife had been a passenger. She was alive. Injured, but stable. She had been taken to the hospital. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone, trying to place the road he mentioned. It wasn't anywhere near her sister's apartment. I asked who she was with. There was a pause. Then the man said another name. A man's name I recognized instantly. Ethan. I didn't say anything for a long time. The silence stretched until the voice on the phone asked if I was still there. I said I was. I thanked him. Hung up. Sat there in the dark. Ethan was a coworker. Not mine. Hers. A respiratory therapist at the same medical complex. I had met him twice. Once at a holiday party. Once when he stopped by our house to drop off a borrowed textbook. He was friendly. A little too relaxed. The kind of man who leaned in when he talked. I remember thinking he seemed harmless. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there and stared at the wall, listening to the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. At some point, I realized I was still wearing my wedding ring. I twisted it around my finger until my skin felt sore. I didn't go to the hospital that night. I told myself it was because it was late. Because she was stable. Because I was in shock. All of that was true, in a way. But there was something else underneath it. A weight I didn't want to lift yet. I slept a little, but not deeply. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her putting on her coat. Heard her asking about the trash bins. That normal voice. That practiced ease. In the morning, my phone was full of messages. From her sister, first. Confused. Apologetic. Saying Laura had never come over. From a number I didn't recognize at first, but knew before I opened it. Laura. She asked if I was awake. If I was okay. If I could come see her. I didn't respond. I went to work instead. I told my boss there was a family emergency, but that I'd be fine. He looked at me like he didn't believe me. He was probably right. I spent the day staring at blueprints without seeing them, answering questions with delays that made people repeat themselves. Around noon, I stepped outside and finally called the hospital. Asked for her room number. The nurse confirmed she was conscious. Bruised ribs. A fractured wrist. No internal bleeding. She was lucky, the nurse said. Lucky. I sat in my car and let the word settle. Laura called again in the afternoon. This time, I answered. She sounded tired. Hoarse. Like she'd been crying. Why aren't you here? She asked. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not I need to explain. Just confusion. Hurt. I told her I needed time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I didn't plan for it to happen like this. That was when I realized she thought I already knew everything. That in her mind, the only wrong thing was the accident. Not the lie. Not the night itself. I asked her how long it had been going on. Another pause. Longer this time. Does it matter right now? She said. I looked at my steering wheel. The small crack in the leather I'd been meaning to fix. Yes, I said. It matters. She told me 6 months. 6 months of late shifts. Weekend conferences. Nights she'd come home smelling like soap that wasn't ours. 6 months of me not asking too many questions because I trusted her. Because I trusted us. I told her I wasn't coming that day. She started crying then. Not loudly. Quiet, uneven breaths. She said she was scared. She said she needed me. She said she didn't understand how I could do this to her now. That sentence stayed with me. How I could do this to her. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat alone in the house we'd bought together 3 years earlier. The one with the creaky third stair and the overgrown maple in the backyard. I walked through each room slowly, like I was already visiting a place I wouldn't live much longer. Her toothbrush was still by the sink. Her running shoes by the door. I wondered, briefly, if I should feel guilty for not being there. For leaving her alone in a hospital bed. Then I remembered the road name again. The distance. The direction. I slept on the couch. Not because the bed felt wrong. Because I wanted to see the front door when I woke up. The next morning, she texted me again. Why won't you come see me? I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Because I don't know who you are right now. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. I'm still me, she wrote. I set the phone down without answering. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just about the affair. Or the accident. Or even the lies. It was about the gap that had opened between who I thought I was married to and the person asking me to pretend none of it mattered. I didn't know yet how far that gap would stretch, or how much it would cost both of us to finally look into it. But I knew, sitting there in the quiet living room, that something permanent had already happened, and no amount of apologies or hospital bracelets could undo it. That was the first day I stopped being her husband in the way I used to understand the word. I didn't go to the hospital right away. That detail would matter later. It would become something she brought up more than once, as if timing alone could explain everything else. At the time, it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like paralysis, like my body understood something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The first morning after the accident, I woke up early and lay there listening to the house. The ticking clock in the kitchen, a truck passing outside, the absence of her breathing beside me. I checked my phone. Several messages from Laura. Missed calls. 1 voicemail. I didn't listen to it yet. I made coffee. Too strong. Drank it anyway. Stood at the counter staring at the window above the sink, trying to remember the last normal conversation we'd had. Not the logistical ones. Not the polite ones. Something real. Nothing came. I went to work because I didn't know where else to go. Told my boss there was a family situation. He didn't press. People rarely do when they sense damage. Throughout the day, my phone kept lighting up. Texts from Laura, then her sister. Updates I hadn't asked for. Words like stable and lucky and minor injuries. All floating on the surface of something much heavier. Around noon, Laura finally texted what she really wanted to say. Are you coming to see me? I stared at the message longer than necessary. I typed, erased, typed again. Nothing sounded honest enough without being cruel. In the end, I didn't respond. That night, I listened to the voicemail. Her voice was thin, shaky. She said she was scared. She said she needed me. She said she didn't understand why I was doing this to her when she was already hurt. I sat on the edge of the couch with the phone in my hand long after it ended. Doing this to her. That phrase lodged itself somewhere deep. The second day was worse. The shock wore off, leaving something sharper behind. I replayed moments from the past 6 months like scenes I'd missed the first time. Late arrivals. Sudden schedule changes. The way she'd sometimes turn her phone face down without thinking. Nothing obvious. That was the problem. It hadn't been sloppy. It had been careful. By the 3rd day, I knew I couldn't avoid her any longer. Avoidance had turned into its own kind of answer, and I wasn't ready to live with that yet. I went to the hospital in the late afternoon. She looked smaller than I expected. Pale, bruised, her wrist wrapped in plaster, resting awkwardly on a pillow. When she saw me, her face softened in a way that felt rehearsed but still sincere. "You came," she said, like it was proof of something. I stood near the foot of the bed. Didn't sit. We talked about her injuries. The accident. The doctors. The weather outside the window. All the safe subjects, lined up neatly between us. Finally, she stopped talking and looked at me more closely. "You're being distant," she said. "Yes," I replied. She frowned slightly, as if she hadn't considered that possibility. "I almost died." "I know," I said. That was when she reached for my hand. I let her touch me, but my arm stayed rigid, like it belonged to someone else. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said. "I never wanted you to find out this way." "Did you want me to find out at all?" I asked. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked away. "I was confused," she said finally. "I didn't plan it. It just developed. Over 6 months," I said. She exhaled, impatient now. "You're focusing on the wrong part." I nodded slowly. That told me more than anything else she'd said. She talked about feeling unseen, about routine, about how life had narrowed without either of us noticing. She said Ethan listened to her, that he made her feel alive again. She didn't ask if I'd felt unseen too. When I asked if she'd ever considered telling me, she said she was trying to protect me, that she didn't want to hurt me unless she was sure of what she wanted. I didn't say it out loud, but I understood then that my pain had never been the deciding factor, only her certainty. She asked if I'd stay with her when she was discharged, said she'd need help, said she couldn't do this alone. I told her I couldn't promise anything. Her expression changed then, not anger, something closer to disbelief. "You're really pulling away," she said. "I'm trying not to lie," I answered. That ended the conversation, even though we stayed in the same room for another few minutes. When I left, I didn't feel dramatic or righteous. I felt empty, like something essential had drained out quietly while no one was looking. That night, I checked into a hotel near my office. Neutral colors. No memories. I slept without dreaming for the first time since the accident. Laura called the next morning. She sounded frustrated now, not fragile. "This isn't fair," she said. "You're acting like I chose this." I didn't correct her. A few days later, I met with a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone, not even Laura. The meeting was brief, factual, almost boring. That, more than anything, made it real. When Laura was discharged, she went to her sister's place. She told me as if she were waiting for me to object. I didn't. She came by the house once to pick up clothes. We moved around each other carefully, like the space itself might shatter if we weren't gentle. At one point, she asked if I was seeing someone else. "No," I said. She studied my face, then nodded. I didn't think so. There was something final in the way she said it, as if she'd already rewritten the story in her head. After she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table and realized something quietly devastating. I wasn't staying away because I wanted to hurt her. I was staying away because every conversation required me to shrink my own reality to make room for hers. And I didn't know how to keep doing that without losing myself completely. That was when I understood this wasn't about the accident anymore, or even the affair. It was about whether I could continue in a life where honesty only appeared after consequences forced it into the room. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that the answer might be no. The silence after she left the house stayed longer than I expected. At first, it felt temporary, like quiet that belonged to a pause, not an ending. I told myself we were in an in-between stage, that something would resolve itself if I waited long enough. But days passed, and the quiet didn't lift. It settled. I began to notice how much of my life had been shaped around her presence. Not in obvious ways, in small ones. I'd slow down when I walked through the house because she moved softly. I kept the TV volume lower than I preferred. I bought food I didn't even like because she did. Without her there, those habits didn't disappear right away. They hovered, confused, like they were waiting for instructions. Laura and I spoke every few days. Never long conversations. Never arguments, either. Just enough to keep a thin thread between us. She asked how work was. I asked how her wrist was healing. We avoided the real subject as if it were a piece of furniture neither of us wanted to bump into. Until one evening, she called and said, "We can't keep doing this." I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, phone pressed to my ear. "Doing what?" I asked. "Pretending we're just paused." she said. We need to talk. Really talk. I knew she was right. I also knew what that conversation would cost. We agreed to meet at the house the next night. I got there early, even though I was already living there again. Cleaned the kitchen, straightened the couch cushions. Familiar motions that used to calm me and now only reminded me of what had changed. She arrived just after 7. Her sister dropped her off and didn't come inside. Laura stood on the porch for a moment before knocking, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. I opened the door. We looked at each other without speaking. She'd lost weight. Her hair was shorter. Her cast was gone, replaced by a stiff brace. She looked like someone who'd been recovering from something bigger than a car accident. We sat across from each other at the dining table. Not side by side. Across. The space between us felt deliberate. I've been thinking a lot, she said. So have I. She nodded. I know I hurt you. I didn't interrupt. I'd learned that silence made people reveal more than arguments ever did. I'm not proud of what I did, she continued. But I need you to understand something. I wasn't trying to replace you. Ethan wasn't you. He was just different. I waited. You and I became so predictable, she said. Everything was planned. Safe. I didn't feel chosen anymore. I felt managed. That stung more than I expected. I didn't know you felt that way, I said. I know, she replied. That's part of the problem. I leaned back in my chair. You could have told me. Yes, she said. I could have. I should have. But I didn't want to risk what we had. The logic circled itself neatly, like it always had. She leaned forward. I want to fix this. I studied her face. The way she spoke with conviction now. The confidence of someone who believed this was still salvageable if she said the right things. What does fixing it look like to you? I asked. She hesitated, then said, counseling. Time. Transparency. I cut off contact with him. When? I asked. After the accident. I nodded. So not before. No, she admitted. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. You didn't choose me, I said quietly. Circumstances did. Her eyes filled. That's not fair. Maybe, I said. But it's how it feels. She reached for my hand across the table. I let her touch it, but again, I didn't return the gesture. I love you, she said. I don't want to lose our life. I pulled my hand back gently. I don't know if that life exists anymore. She stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying I don't know if I can unlearn what I know now, I replied. I don't know if I can trust my own perception again. She shook her head. People rebuild trust all the... Yes, I said, finishing the thought she'd already anticipated. People rebuild trust all the time. But they usually rebuild it with someone who stayed honest when it mattered. The room went quiet after that. Not the awkward kind. The kind where both people realize the conversation has crossed into territory where rehearsed answers no longer work. Laura looked down at the table. Her fingers traced the edge of a placemat we'd bought together years ago. I remembered the day we picked it out. How inconsequential it had felt at the time. How permanent everything had seemed. I know I handled it wrong, she said finally. I know I should have come to you first. But I didn't think I was strong enough to hear what you might say. I leaned back and crossed my arms. So you made sure I didn't get a say at all. She flinched. Not dramatically. Just enough to tell me the truth had landed. I'm here now, she said. I'm telling you everything. I shook my head slowly. You're telling me everything now because there's nothing left to hide. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Her shoulders sagged a little. You weren't supposed to find out like this, she said again. That's the part you keep coming back to, I replied. Not that it happened, just that I found out. She looked up at me then, her eyes sharp. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said. But it's honest. She stood up and started pacing the room, careful with her wrist. I stayed seated, watching her move through a space that no longer felt shared. You're acting like I planned to destroy us, she said. Like I wanted to hurt you. I don't think you wanted to hurt me, I said. I think you just didn't want to feel uncomfortable. She stopped pacing. That's not the same thing. It's close enough, I said. She turned toward me, frustration rising. So what, that's it? 5 years just erased. No, I said. They happened. They mattered. That's why this hurts. She sank back into her chair. For the first time since she arrived, she looked tired instead of defensive. I don't know who I am without this marriage, she admitted quietly. The words hit me harder than anything else she'd said. I believed her, but I also realized something important in that moment. She was afraid of losing the structure of her life. I was afraid of losing myself inside it. Those fears weren't compatible. I'm not asking for answers tonight, she said. I'm asking for a chance. I considered that. Really considered it. I thought about counseling sessions. Long talks. Years of watching her phone light up and wondering if the story I was being told matched reality. I don't think I can give you that, I said. Her breath caught. So you've decided. I've decided I can't pretend anymore, I replied. I can't keep negotiating my own instincts just to keep things intact. She stared at me like I was someone she used to know. I would have forgiven you, she said, if it were the other way around. I didn't doubt that. Laura had always been generous with forgiveness, especially when it cost her less than honesty would have. I don't want forgiveness, I said. I want alignment. And we don't have that anymore. She cried then. Not quietly this time. Her shoulders shook. Her hands covered her face. I stayed where I was. Not because I didn't care. Because stepping in would have been another kind of lie. After a while, she wiped her face and stood. So what happens now? She asked. I'll file, I said. We'll do this cleanly. Respectfully. But separately. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer but hoped she wouldn't hear it. She paused at the door before leaving. I never stopped loving you, she said. I met her eyes. I know. That was the last honest thing we said to each other that night. The weeks that followed felt unreal. Like I was watching my own life through glass. The paperwork moved faster than my emotions did. Signatures, disclosures, divisions of things that once felt shared in a way numbers couldn't capture. Friends found out in fragments. Some reached out. Some didn't know what to say and chose silence. I didn't blame them. I barely knew what to say myself. Laura and I spoke only when necessary. Logistics, finances, the house. We sold it. Watching strangers walk through our living room, commenting on the light and the layout, felt like attending my own wake. I stood in the corner and answered questions politely, as if I weren't slowly dismantling a version of my future. Laura moved into her own apartment. I didn't ask where. She didn't offer. Ethan never came up again. Not by name. Not directly. But he was there in the negative space of every conversation. A ghost neither of us wanted to acknowledge. One afternoon, a few months into the separation, Laura called unexpectedly. I need to tell you something, she said. I closed my laptop and listened. He moved out of state, she said. I thought you should know. I waited. I don't know why I'm telling you, she added. I guess I want you to know I didn't choose him. I closed my eyes. You didn't choose me either. There was silence on the line. I hope one day you'll understand, she said. I understand, I replied. That doesn't mean I agree. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment and felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Closure was too clean a word. It was more like acceptance. The divorce was finalized quietly. No courtroom drama. No speeches. Just 2 signatures and a judge who had seen hundreds of similar endings. I walked out of the building alone. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Ate at the table instead of the couch. I noticed I liked the quiet now. Not because it was peaceful. Because it was honest. I thought about the hospital. About the first time she asked why I wouldn't visit. About how confused she'd sounded. As if love automatically required proximity. I realized then that love without truth is just habit wearing a familiar face. And habits, no matter how long they've lasted, can be broken. I didn't feel victorious. Or healed. Or free in the way people like to describe fresh starts. I felt older. But I also felt grounded. For the first time since the night of the accident, my life felt like it belonged to me again. Not because it was better, but because it was real. And that, I was learning, was enough to begin with. After the divorce was finalized, people expected something from me. They expected anger, mostly, or bitterness, a sharp edge. When that didn't show up, some of them looked disappointed, like I'd skipped an important step in the process. Others assumed I was fine because I wasn't loud about the damage. I wasn't fine, but I was quieter than they expected. Life settled into a new rhythm. Not a better one, just different. I woke up early, went for long walks before work, learned which grocery stores were open late, learned how little space one person actually needs. There were nights when the loneliness arrived without warning. Not the dramatic kind, just a dull presence that sat beside me on the couch and stayed until I went to sleep. I let it. Fighting it felt pointless. I didn't date. Not because I was afraid. Because I didn't want to carry unfinished things into something new. I didn't want to explain myself in fragments or apologize for caution. Every now and then, Laura crossed my mind. Not in the way she used to. Less vivid, less sharp, more like a distant memory I hadn't decided what to do with yet. Then, about 8 months after the accident, she called again. I almost didn't answer, but I did. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't talk about herself. She went straight to the point. I don't think I ever apologized the right way, she said. I leaned against the kitchen counter and waited. I was angry that night, she continued. Not just at you. At myself. At the situation. I kept asking why you wouldn't come to the hospital, and I never asked why you couldn't. I closed my eyes. I thought if you came, it would mean we were still okay, she said. And when you didn't, I felt rejected instead of accountable. I didn't interrupt. I know this doesn't change anything, she said. I just needed to say it without expecting something back. I believed her. Or at least, I believed she meant it in that moment. Thank you, I said, for saying it. That was all. We hung up, and I stood there longer than necessary, holding the phone like it might offer more if I waited. It didn't. A few weeks later, I ran into Ethan by accident. It was at a hardware store on the other side of town. I was looking for light bulbs. He was standing at the end of the aisle, comparing paint samples. He looked older, thinner, less sure of himself. He recognized me instantly. Daniel, he said, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. I nodded. Ethan. We stood there, two men who shared a history neither of us wanted to claim. I didn't handle things well, he said after a moment. I should have stayed away. Yes, I replied. He swallowed. I'm sorry. I believe that too. In a limited way. In the way people are sorry when consequences finally catch up to them. I hope you are, I said. He nodded, relief and discomfort passing over his face in equal measure. I walked away before either of us could say something unnecessary. That encounter stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it reopened anything. Because it closed something quietly. I realized then that I didn't need apologies to move on. I needed clarity. And I finally had it. Time did what it always does. It softened the edges without erasing the shape of what had happened. I bought a small house near a park. Nothing fancy, just enough. I painted the walls myself. Planted a tree in the backyard. Watched it struggle at first, then take hold. Some evenings, I sat on the porch and listened to the neighborhood. Dogs barking. Kids riding bikes. Ordinary sounds that reminded me life didn't stop because mine had changed direction. One night, a friend asked if I regretted not going to the hospital sooner. I thought about it carefully. No, I said. I regret the reasons I had to choose. That answer surprised him. It surprised me too. Because it was true. I didn't regret protecting myself in the moment when everything I believed about my life cracked open. I didn't regret choosing distance when closeness would have required denial. I'd learned something I hadn't expected. Love isn't proven by showing up no matter what. Sometimes it's proven by knowing when showing up would cost you your sense of reality. I never went back to that hospital. Never stood beside her bed and held her hand. That chapter closed without that scene. And I was okay with that. The accident changed everything. Not because of the injuries. Because of the truth it exposed. And in the quiet life that followed, I found something steadier than forgiveness or reconciliation. I found myself. Not the version of me who avoided conflict or trusted out of habit, but the one who could stand alone without collapsing. The one who understood that walking away can be an act of honesty, not abandonment. Some stories end with reconciliation, some with justice, some with revenge. Mine ended with acceptance. And that, finally, felt like enough.